Welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club. We are a monthly get together of skeptics and believers respectfully discussing books from both perspectives. And my name is James Walker. I'm the co-founder of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. I'm an evangelical Christian, president of Watchman Fellowship, which is a Christian apologetics group focusing mostly on interfaith evangelism. We've been doing the book club now for about 7 years, and some interesting developments that we're going to go over in this book club and share with you guys. I'm the Christian co-founder of the book club, and my partner is Bill Cluck. Bill is a former Christian atheist when I met him 7 years ago, maybe a little bit more than 7 years ago now, and he is uh, been co-founder of the book club, and he has an important announcement to make that's going to be affecting the future of our book club, however this comes out. So please hang around for that. That's going to be later this evening. We're going to do that. Filling in for him as his usual co-host position is going to be Kelly, who is better known as Godless Granny, who has been I would say, member of our book club and has been a guest co-host before with us. She's co-hosting now in Bill's place. Bill is kind of recusing himself from the book club for right now while he's working on some things, which we'll talk about later today. So Kelly is a retired attorney, former Christian. She's based in Alabama. She's the proprietor of the Godless Granny YouTube channel, and we'll talk to her in just a moment. So I wanted to get right to our guest today. Our guest author is Lawrence Shapiro. Lawrence is a graduate summa cum laude from Dickinson College in 1984, and he earned entry into Phi Beta Kappa. Received his PhD in philosophy from the University of Pennsylvania in 1992. He's now professor in the Department of Philosophy at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he's published a number of articles in top-tier philosophical journals, also author of The Mind Incarnate. He's also co-edited Arguing About the Mind, a book of reading in the philosophy of mind genre. He published the book Embodied Cognition, in which he lays out an in-depth explanation of embodied cognition theories and their rivals. That would be interesting. This evening, though, we're going to be discussing his book, The Miracle Myth, Why Belief in the Resurrection and Miracles is Unjustified. So looking forward to that, excited about that. And so welcome to the book club, Larry.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Nice to meet all of you.
I got the privilege of watching the interview that you did with Daniel Ray, and it made me even more excited the time you'd be able to share with us, spend with us. I want to thank you for doing that. I'm going to switch over to Kelly and let her kind of introduce the first question. For the participants that are here, if you have a question, want to make a comment or ask somebody a question, if you'll put that in the text, then Daniel Ray and Brady Blevins will be calling you up at the right appropriate time. So, Kelly, what you got for Larry?
Well, my first question to Larry is, are you a mythicist?
Am I a mythicist?
Yes.
Can you tell me what a mythicist is?
Okay. A person who believes that Jesus either was not a historical person, that either he was a myth or he's a conglomeration of people, but he was not one historical person.
No, I'm not a mythicist. I think there's evidence that Jesus was a actual figure in history.
Okay. But you do think that the resurrection is a myth, obviously.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. What's your strongest reason for that position?
Um, Well,
I know there's a lot of them.
no, well, I think I could put it pretty simply. We want to use a particular method of inference in order to justify the belief that Jesus was resurrected. That the form of inference is called inference to the best explanation, and this is the kind of inference that we're compelled to use whenever we're trying to justify the belief in something that we didn't directly witness ourselves, typically. So the detective who is trying to figure out who murdered John relies on an inference to the best explanation when collecting evidence and finding someone's fingerprints, someone's footprints, a motive. All these different pieces of evidence get collected together, and when they all point to the murderer, call him Frank, we infer that Frank rather than someone else was the murderer because that's what best explains the sort of evidence that we saw, the fingerprints, the footprints, and so on. So we also have to rely on this kind of inference in order to establish whether Jesus was in fact resurrected. There's some subtleties that we'll have to come back to later if we need to. But so now we imagine that we receive reports of Jesus dying and then appearing again a few days later. What we want to explain is why we're getting these reports. What best explains why the testaments say what they do? And it seems to me that one explanation for why the reports are as they are is that Jesus really did rise from the dead. But I can't imagine that that's actually the best explanation for those reports. We can come up with many other explanations for why those reports exist, and many of them seem better than the hypothesis that Jesus actually rose from the dead. So that's my strongest argument.
Okay. Are you familiar with Pelagia's minimal witnesses theory?
No, I'm not. Please tell me about it.
Okay. He wrote as a guest columnist for Bart Ehrman and explained this, and he's also done a number of videos on it. His explanation is that Peter had a bereavement hallucination, and his bereavement hallucination was something that he shared with many, and that is where the stories of Jesus' resurrection grew from. And one of the things he points to is that, even though the gospel accounts say that there were mass events where numbers of people saw Jesus, we really don't have any historical corroboration for any of the of these mass accounts.
That's a good explanation. I could think of a dozen other explanations that seem to me, actually more than a dozen. I can think of hundreds of explanations that seem to me better than Jesus actually rose from the dead. Elaine Pagels, if you're familiar with her book, has a new book out on the resurrection, and she talks at length about various possibilities to explain why these reports of his resurrection exist, none of which require his actual resurrection. I mean, just think about, we have stories not only about Jesus, but every religion has their own stories. Every culture has its own myths. Why should we think that this one regarding Jesus happens to be the true one, whereas all the other ones are false, given that the evidence is no better for Jesus' resurrection than it is for any of these other myths?
Like the myth of Julius Caesar rising from the dead.
Myth of Julius Caesar. We're just, I mean, so you mentioned the bereavement hallucination. It seems to me even more likely that something like this happened. Jesus had a group of devout followers, and maybe they wanted to tell a story in order to perpetuate his teachings, and they thought that this is one that would win additional adherents. We know that kind of stuff happens today in other contexts, or maybe the the accounts we have been corrupted over time, and so they're reporting something that was never in the original reports. Surely that's more likely than someone dying and coming back to life. That seems that's the direction I take toward this kind of evidence.
That seems reasonable.
Hey, Larry, thanks to also for doing the interview with Daniel Ray on our staff. Which
Nice time talking to Daniel.
Yeah, it was a great interview, and it helped. A lot of people don't have time to read as much as we would like to, and so it gives another option so where you can feel like you know the author and are engaged in the topic. To be able to ask some questions, and so I appreciate that. You did mention in that interview with Daniel that one of your motivations was for the writing the book was that you saw some issues, I guess social issues, culture issues with Christianity that you felt were harmful or not desirable, maybe be a better way of saying it. And so you said something along the lines of if the there was a justified reason to believe these doctrines, then it may make that more understandable to shape the culture with that. But you felt like there was no foundation for it. So the book was kind of a way of correcting these social injustices by simply trying to take down the whole religion, so to speak. So if the resurrection didn't happen, then we don't have to worry about any of these Christian things.
Yeah, or putting it with a little bit more nuance, I think. There are a lot of Christians governing us right now who are fighting or defending policies on the basis of their belief. And so my view is that if these people want to create legislation that reflects their Christian view that has an impact on how everyone in the country, not just Christians, live their lives, then they better be really, really sure that the justification for this is on sound ground.
Have you gotten any feedback from believers who read the book? And what I really liked about the book is you categorize things, I thought, real well, as far as what's the difference between, like a true versus a false belief. And a true belief can be one that is unjustified, so just because you're not saying it's not true, you're just saying we're not warranted to believe these things for your various reasons on that. So I like that. It gets you thinking outside the box a little bit.
Good.
Too many times I think for all of us, we can have there's a tendency to what we want to be true is what we, are going to be arguing for. So it's we want to think, how do we get there? This is what the whole book club is about. And so we try to get together and say, oh, well, this is why you believe this. This is why you have this position. So I thought that was helpful. And you have gotten some feedback from some believers who've said, hey, you gave me something good to think about.
Of course, yeah. So Mike Lacona, I don't know if you're familiar with Mike's work, but he and I have debated on a number of occasions, and it tends to be an audience that is partial toward Mike's own views. But I get positive feedback from that. Theists whose minds I, of course, haven't changed, but appreciate the opportunity to think more deeply about some of these issues. And theists who might have been skeptical and thankful that there's someone giving voice to things that they were uncomfortable saying themselves.
I see that Ken Daniels has a question. Ken's a former Christian agnostic who's been a longtime member of the club. Ken, did you want to unmute and ask Larry a question?
Sure. I think I'm already. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Dr. Shapiro. Appreciate it. It's a treat to have somebody of your caliber with us. I'm like James mentioned, I'm a former evangelical believer myself. grew up as a missionary kid in Africa and then later became a missionary myself, and left the faith for initially deism for about a year or two before sliding into agnosticism or atheist-leaning agnosticism. And this book club has given me a lot to think about. I appreciate all of the interaction, all the books we've been able to read. I do appreciate, I think better than when I started the book club, the level of intellect that those across the aisle from me exhibit. I mean, you mentioned Mike Licona and others that you have a respect for them, even if you disagree with them. And I think I've come to gain that same sort of respect that I probably didn't have as much before joining this club. So it's been a good experience. But anyway, long way to introduce my question. I was talking with a believer, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago about the resurrection. He was trying to convince me that it was the best explanation for the facts. And I used a lot of the same arguments that you use in the book, not the statistical Bayesian argument about what was it, postulatus, which I think was a great tool that you brought to bear. So he was trying to use common sense arguments such as those used by Dr. Timothy McGrew, who's a philosopher at I think Eastern Michigan State University, where Timothy McGrew uses, I think, 7 different lines of argument to say, well, normally if it's bad testimony, there's going to be certain features that you're going to see. It's going to be the testimony is going to come later in time relative to the events they're testifying to. It's going to be farther spread geographically from the events that they pertain to. I don't remember all 7 of them. I could bring it up and list them all. But what struck me was that he was using human experience about the way things normally work to argue in favor of something that defies human experience, i.e. that somebody would rise from the dead. So in other words, normally people who are close to the event, they don't distort their testimony, or if they're close geographically, or if they're close in time, all these other things. So, and normally people don't die for what they know is a lie. So all these things that normally in human experience that we relate to, he was lining up all of these on one side to try to prove that something that we'd never experienced actually is more likely than not. And so I was laying this out to my friend, my Christian friend, to try to convince him of my position that warranted belief in Jesus, or belief in Jesus' resurrection is not warranted. But then he countered back with something I wasn't able to really respond to in the moment. And he said, well, you think that life arose spontaneously at some point in the past, in the far distant past. That's not something we have experience with. That's not something that that we can justify, right? That because life doesn't come, who is it that proved that spontaneous generation doesn't exist? You put a lid on the meat, the spoiled meat or whatever, and there were no maggots that came out of it. And so he once and for all he proved that spontaneous generation is a myth. And so he basically pushed me into this position where I said, well, by faith, I think that life came to exist at some point. I don't know how. It seems exceedingly unlikely, but yet I believe it, right? Because if I'm going to be a naturalist, you have to think that life came about somehow at some point spontaneously, right? So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out to you to see how you would address a question like that if it were posed to you.
Thank you for that question. That was really interesting. So I have a number of things I'd like to say. First, let's talk about the idea that what we need to explain is how life came about spontaneously. that's a very, I think, simplistic way of understanding the evolutionary history behind living organisms that are around today. It's not as if there was a switch at some point in the history of the Earth where we went from no life on Earth to life on Earth. The first living things, and here we should probably put living in scare quotes, because they were simply packets of chemicals, and what made these packets of chemicals the kind of forerunners of living things is that they were able to replicate themselves. So whether a simple group of collection of chemicals capable of self-replication counts as a living thing, I'm not sure, but it was advances on that that eventually, over billions of years, resulted in the sorts of organisms that we see around today. So I think your friend was in a sense assuming too much in putting on you the burden of explaining how life could spontaneously arise. What arose were these replicating packets of chemicals, and then shaped by billions of years of selection, they became what we see around us today. So that's one thing I'd want to say. But let's now turn to McGrew's comments about these features that seem to make the reports of Jesus more difficult to explain away than other reports of incredible events. It still seems to me that even if the people involved in reporting the resurrection were nearby, were willing to die, were in the same temporal space, there's still a better explanation for why they said what they did than that Jesus actually rose from the dead. If we look at the sort of things that people believed 2,000 years ago, it's I think important to emphasize that the way they saw the world, the way they conceived of the world, was vastly different from the way that we in the Western educated world see the world today. So it was commonplace in Jesus's day to believe all sorts of miracles. People believed in the Roman pantheon. People believed in that hobgoblins could be killed with certain kinds of incantations. It's much more likely, it seems to me, that whatever happened at that tomb thousands of years ago was misunderstood than it was that Jesus actually rose from the dead, in the same way that people in early Roman first century AD misunderstood many other things about the world. And the final thing I want to say is we've been talking about just one kind of inference to the explanation, best explanation. That's the inference that tries to explain to us why the reports of the resurrection existed in the first place. One explanation is Jesus was actually resurrected, and my claim has been there are better explanations of those reports. But here's another kind of inference to the best explanation we have to think about. Suppose that those reports were in fact true, that Jesus actually did rise from the dead. Now we have something else we want to explain. What explains why Jesus rose from the dead? One hypothesis is that he was divine, but we can come up with other hypotheses as well, and then we want to know why we prefer the divinity hypothesis to these other hypotheses. It's conceivable that aliens with advanced technology resurrected Jesus. Now you might think, oh, come on, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but is it dumber than saying he actually came to life because he was divine? Not from my perspective. So that's what I would say to your friend.
So in terms of the postulitis thing, reason I like that is because I have a background in statistics. And I remember studying that very phenomenon in statistics, completely divorced from the question of miracles and resurrection. It's just it's a principle, it's a bedrock principle in statistics that and it's counterintuitive. It's very counterintuitive. Nobody, when they first encounter it, everybody shakes their head. But then when you see the math, it's like, yeah, that's true. So how would you relate like the calculus like that to to the singular event of the origin of life, whether you call it self-replicating molecules, which we still haven't, as humans, we haven't been able to, even with all our ingenuity, we haven't been able to develop self-replicating molecules. So even though they're simpler than, cellular life as we know it today, still it's quite a hurdle to overcome something like that. It's a singular event. We have Luca, the last universal common ancestor. Scientists believe there was really one origin of life event because it was so unlikely and singular. But how do you apply the kind of the Bayesian calculus to that sort of thing? Like, if it's, is it applicable at all, or is it completely different apples and oranges to what you're talking about?
Well, when you're relying on a Bayesian sort of framework, you're typically testing one hypothesis against another hypothesis. One hypothesis might be that life evolved from these packets of self-replicating material, and the other hypothesis might be that life was breathed into matter by a divine being. And of course, then the first hypothesis, that life that there was at some point the origin of self-replicating packets of material. What we want to do in order to think about its likelihood is try to understand the conditions that were present in the world a few billion years ago, develop computer models that tell us how chemicals respond to certain kinds of temperature and other sorts of physical factors, and see whether the kinds of self-replicating packets from which life arose are the sorts of things that would come about. Perhaps it is an unlikely event, but can we explain how they might come about? And yeah, we can. We have the science to understand how this can happen. Is it unlikely? I actually don't know. There are billions of planets out there, and my bet is that a lot of them have life on them. So I don't know how likely it is. But then the other hypothesis is that some divine being breathed life into matter. Okay, how do we go about testing that? Well, we might want to have to find a lot of divine beings and test their breath for life-giving properties. And if we could do that, then we could have some way of assessing the one hypothesis against the other. But we have no way of testing whether it's possible for a divine being to breathe life into matter.
We could also have that divine being breathe life into, matter right before our eyes.
Yeah.
That would work.
If we knew that the being were in fact divine.
Right.
Larry, I got a couple of questions. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. I'm sorry. My mic was a mess last week. But thank you, Larry, for coming on again. It was fun to talk to you. Nice to see you again.
Yeah. And likewise.
Kelly, welcome. Nice to see you. And glad we have, the last person that was in that chair. Well, we haven't talked about it, but anyway. Yeah, we'll get to it.
I saw the video that I think you're talking about.
It was a short video on our. Yeah, this one there's three questions here, and then you can take whichever direction you want to take with them. So I know this may sound cheeky. I'm not trying to be cheeky, but it was like a question that I had heard. I don't remember where I heard it exactly, but it's not original to me. But for clarification, before I even ask it, because I don't want to assume, because I'm not sure we talked about the beginning of the universe when you and I talked. Did we ever get around? I don't think we got around to that, did we?
I don't think we did.
What is presently your position on the origin or the beginning of the universe, or even if you think there wasn't one? What do you think?
I think I lack the astrophysics to give you a form answer. I mean,
Fair
from
enough.
what I understand, there was a Big Bang about 14 billion years ago. That's
Gotcha. Okay, so you're standard like everybody else. You know, the kind of like the best model seems to be some kind of origin story, minus all the complicated physics. So the cheeky thing that I heard was, if universes can come into existence, and you know, nobody's arguing the universe is pretty significantly sized, why is that the only thing that pops into existence? Like, why can't things that are much less complicated than a universe come into being from nothing? And I can remember where I got part of this. There was an astronomer in the 1960s and 1970s. I forgot his name. He was a Cornell astronomer. He was at Cornell with Carl Sagan. Drake is, it's, oh, I can't think of his name. I'll think of it later. But anyway, he wrote a book. He wrote a textbook. It was a standard textbook on cosmology for a while. And he posited, half serious, half joking, he said it would be easier to explain star formation if stars just came into existence. And so I'm wondering, from a philosophical perspective, if a universe can pop into existence, say pop into, I'm using a colloquial phrasing, I don't mean to gloss over the physics, why couldn't life come into existence? Because this ties together with your idea that early life was just chemicals, self-replicating chemicals. Could something have more significant than self-replicating chemicals have come into existence, something like the universe did? Because there's a debate in evolution right now about structural formation in evolutionary, in biological life. In other words, around Darwin's time, people were arguing about structuralism versus formalism. I think I've got the terms wrong. I might have got the terms wrong, but the idea is this, that there are certain body types and forms within living organisms that seem to defy a long, slow, gradual evolutionary process. In other words, a lot of people in Darwin's day and beyond were arguing that these things made a species a species. They were there and cannot be explained in any sort of evolutionary sort of way. So is it possible that things can come into being that are much less complicated than a universe for life? Is that possible, do you think? I mean, if all things are on the table, it's weird that the universe just poof, comes into being, and life, the origin of life, seems strange. Why does it have to be chemicals? Why couldn't it be something else? That's my question.
Well, so is your question something like, why couldn't a squirrel just come into being?
Well, maybe not quite that, but I mean, if we're talking about like I'm taking the overall cosmos itself before, you know, taking the Big Bang cosmology, all this stuff comes into being.
Daniel, are you thinking that a universe is more complicated than a squirrel? Is that what your argument is?
I would say, yeah, that's a good way to put it, Ken. That maybe a squirrel isn't exactly as big as a universe, and so why don't I know where it's William Lane Craig. He argued. He says sometimes he's like, why don't root beer and Beethoven and bicycles and other things pop into existence that are less complex and smaller than a universe? Why just universes?
I don't know that they're less complex. I mean, the thing about living beings is they're winning the war against entropy, and that doesn't seem true of the universe. But also just the kind of inference that you're relying on doesn't seem to me a sound one. So if the universe could just pop into being, so could anything else. But no, that's just not a good inference. I mean, it's like saying, well, if a chicken can lay eggs, why can't people?
Well, when you get into cosmology and you look beyond the Big Bang, there are serious cosmological theories like the Hugh Everett many worlds, where the universe is the result of a physical wave function collapse, and the outgrowth of that is that there's wave function collapses all over the universe, and there are, you and I are in switched positions, and then we have our doppelgangers all over the universe in many different ways. Same thing with a multiverse. Multiverse isn't a wave function collapse, but it's just many universes, a string of universes. And so the implications of these theories, which are taken seriously in physics to some degree, and even string theory, is that there are many selves, many of us, many multiple copies of us. And that's kind of, I don't want to use the word normative, but it's not science fiction. I'll just put it that way. So if we're talking about multiple selves and multiple universes, be them multiverses or wave function collapses, I don't see that being any less reasonable than squirrels popping into existence here in this world. I mean, you know what I mean? So I don't know, like, where's the level of, I guess the next underlying question is, where's the level of acceptability, which is what is fantastical and what is unreasonable? Where is that line drawn when we're talking about these kinds of things? What do you think?
Well, so theories like the multiverse, theories like the wave collapse, these are theories that weren't just made up. These are theories that some of the most ingenious individuals with the most profound understanding of the natural world see as being entailed by evidence they've collected about the universe. And something like string theory has it's untestable right now. It's just
right.
It's just something that it's based purely on mathematics, and well, not purely on mathematics. It's based on mathematics and certain understanding of principles of how nature works. So it's not like these scientists are making stuff up. It's incredible stuff. I mean, I don't know how to get my head around these results, but it's completely naturalistic in spirit. And there are quantum physicists who would say, yeah, squirrels do pop into existence. They're floating around the universe right now because of these weird quantum phenomena. But
well, along
I
those
don't see this as at all friendly to a theist position, because look, if things can just pop into existence naturally, why don't we just say Jesus popped into life again after dying? And we don't.
Well, I'm taking within the naturalistic perspective of the things that the naturalistic theses of the origins of life and the origins of the universe. So it's like, on the one hand, to your point, I totally agree that the physics behind multiverse and many worlds has been worked out. Sean Carroll embraces Hugh Everett's wave function collapse. I don't think he takes the multi-selves too seriously, but he does find that the math is nice for that. But it's like the non-scientist is kind of told to, well, this is your bowl of Wheaties, man, eat it. I don't care what you think. I don't care how weird you think it is. This is the science. And I could give you some physics, but you're not going to understand it. Pat on the head. And I'm just supposed to swallow the weirdness in the naturalistic perspective. But when we're just talking about one individual rising from the dead, it seems far less fantastical than the cosmologies that we hear coming from top-notch, super smart physicists. That's kind of
I strongly disagree with you, Daniel. You just had Kelsey Johnson on a couple of months ago.
Yes, we did.
She had her book, which happens to be supporting my microphone at the moment.
Oh.
And she took the physics of the origin of the universe and brought it down to the popular level.
She did a great job of that. I totally agree. Yes.
I have no background in astronomy whatsoever.
She was great.
I could understand about 70% of the book. And, to discuss your point on, things popping in and out of existence, that is one of the points she brings out in the book, is that gluons do pop in and out of existence. They are known to do that. And they are pairs of matter and antimatter. And one of her theories is that because gluons do pop into and out of existence, when they pop into a black hole, when they pop out, they cause the black hole to contract. And her theory is that the contraction of a black hole is what caused our universe to expand. Sort of
Yeah,
like
that's
filling up a balloon. Yeah.
I totally I totally, Kelly, totally agree with you. That's, again, what to my point, that physics over our heads, literally, quite literally.
Mhm.
The black holes are so enigmatic. I have a friend, Sarah Salviander, who's a black hole specialist too. And my point is, I totally agree with you. I think the science is totally strange. But really smart people are crunching the numbers and coming up with these fantastical theories. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying that the level of my bigger overarching question is the weirdness of reality. Let's say some of these are true or have a semblance of truth to them. And it's like when we're talking about a resurrection, or we're talking about multi-universes or worlds coming out of black holes and colliding gluons. We had Graham Oppie on a couple of months ago. We talked about infinite widgets and fairies. It's like this stuff is so fantastical. Where do we draw this line, especially with a naturalism, about what's weird and acceptable and what's weird and unacceptable? That's just kind of where I'm coming at. So I totally agree with your point, Kelly. I mean, I loved how Kelsey brought the science down to earth. She was so good, and she was so congenial about trying to take both sides of things. And cosmology and physics is weird. It's over my head. I'm not making fun of it. I'm not saying it's all wrong. I'm just saying that there's a level of fantasticalness, if that's a word, to this discussion about the origin of the universe, the origin of life, stuff we've never seen, stuff we're sort of implying by what we have seen, but it's fantastical, even if it's true or if it's not true. And so I'm thinking, with the resurrection, you throw that, where does that on the scale of weirdness? You know what I mean? We're talking about reality.
But the reason to reject the resurrection is not simply because it's weird.
It is weird. I will say it's weird. I'm a Christian,
not
and it's
simply
weird.
because it's weird. It's
Yeah.
not simply because it's weird. So when we have these cosmological theories that they're hard for me to understand, my own area is philosophy of cognitive science. I feel much more comfortable in that domain. I have colleagues who are physicists, and I defer to them, but I could ask them questions like, well, what's the justification for that claim? And then they will try to explain it to me until they become impatient with my stupidity. But
Same.
and then I can ask, well, what justifies that belief? And I can ask about the sort of background assumptions that many of these theories have in common.
Mm-hmm.
I can listen to two physicists arguing with each other, physicists who have different cosmological theories they wish to defend, and they'll have points of agreement, and then they'll explain to each other why it is they think the other is wrong. But when we get to Jesus's resurrection, yeah, it's weird. We agree about that, but how do we interrogate that kind of event in order to deepen our understanding of it in a way that the physicists do when promoting or detracting the cosmological theories that they are investigating?
Yeah, it's like you said a few minutes ago. A couple of billion years ago, life began with a sack of chemicals that were self-replicating. I mean, we haven't seen that. I mean, I'm not saying it, maybe that's how God did it, or maybe that's reality. I'm not the point, not to criticize that per se, but it's just the leap back into time a couple of billion years ago, and to say that it all started with some chemical sacks. Like, well, I mean, we have more eyeballs in and around Jerusalem first century than we do anything a couple of billion years ago. So
no, but we have things like viruses today that are basically packets of self-replicating materials.
right.
We have available to us now things in the world that we can investigate and understand and extrapolate from this understanding how things like those, similar to those, might have come to be. And then we have ways of generating models using computational simulations, where we plug into these models various conditions that we believe to have been present billions of years ago. The constitution of the soupy water that was around at the time, And we can rely on our principles of chemistry to understand how these things come to be. So yeah, we weren't there, we didn't see it, but most of the universe is beyond our observation. Most of the world is beyond our observation, but that doesn't mean that our beliefs about these things can't be justified.
Have you? Go ahead. I'm done. I'm all finished. Thanks, Larry. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the great questions.
Sure, it was fun.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could maybe curve this back to the subject of the book, where I think the core insight was maybe a little bit humane evidence, evidence that, or you need better evidence for things that are unusual or unlikely than you do for things that are mundane. And we've talked about that a lot in this book club. And Tim McGrew visited us, and he's a very much opponent of humane thinking. And I was just kind of wondering what your perspective on Hume is, and the whole idea that it's begging the question. And I want to bring James into this too, because when we've talked about this, and I've said in the past, well, maybe even if the resurrection did happen, we don't have any justification for embracing it. We could be, it could have happened, and we still are not justified in believing it. And James, I think, complains, says, well, then, if there really was alien life, alien visitors, how would we know? If we, because it's so unusual, nobody would ever believe it, because it just, we can't ever justify something that's unusual like that, or unlikely like that. So do we just have to live with the unfairness that we just, even if it did happen, we can't prove it, or we can't be justified in believing it? Maybe speak to that, because I think maybe James could articulate it better than I've articulated. But
That's a good start. That's a good start to where I wanted to go. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Sorry, James, did you want to?
No. Go ahead and answer that part. But I wanted to pursue that a little bit further, maybe.
Yeah. Well, certainly there are things that occurred in the past that we'll never know, and we'll never have a justification for believing. So, did it rain in Madison, Wisconsin on this day 2,000 years ago? I really don't know. I'll never know. No one will ever know. But it did rain, or it didn't rain. It's just beyond our ability to know. Now, you might say, I think this is the best case. You might say, was Jesus resurrected? We don't really know. We weren't there to see it. We have reports. There are, I think, strong grounds for doubting the veracity of these reports, given that reports of similar events were common back then. So maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. But I think we're justified in saying it probably did not happen. And the reason we're justified in that is because we know that people who die stay dead.
Yeah, that's helpful. Now, the thing that, just going back to your kind of initial chart, just to make sure I'm on the same page with you and stuff. I think I am, but it's you do a good job of saying, hey, we all have this collection of beliefs, and some of them are true and some of them are false. Now, of course, I've got a higher percentage of true beliefs than you, but we all have some kind of mix of true and false beliefs. So,
Okay.
But the question is you're dealing with is not whether or not it's true or false, but are we justified in believing it? And
Yeah.
we can, as you point out very well, we can have unjustified false beliefs, or we can have justified false beliefs. The example you gave, which I like, is the lottery ticket. Your lottery ticket will lose. Well, you're pretty justified in having that position, just based on the raw math of it. That it's going to be an unjustified belief if you think you're going to win, and if you think you're going to lose. But what happens when you actually do win? And so, as improbable as that is, because of the millions of people playing the lottery, yes, almost every week somebody wins. So it was improbable that you would be the person, but somebody has to win. And so your lottery. Now, here's my question, though. Your lottery ticket will lose is a justified false belief because you did win. At what point does it become a justified belief? Now that you won, is it become a justified belief?
I think it depends on the context. So, I mean, and you might say something like, once your evidence makes the event in question more probable than not, that is a probability greater than 0.5, maybe we'll call that the
But
threat.
you're still dealing with all the improbability never went away. You've never resolved the improbability.
with
You're
the
still not justified. If you tell me right now, hey, and I actually won the lottery, I still say I'm not justified for believing what you just told me.
So the case is, I have won the lottery, and I've told you I've won the lottery, but you don't think you're
Too
just
improbable.
believing me.
Too improbable.
Well, that's not the position I would take, because after all, we know that someone will win the lottery, and we know that I'm no more. Let's suppose that everyone bought the same number of tickets. So let's suppose that I'm no less likely than anyone else to win the lottery. If I'm reporting that I won it and no one else is reporting that they won it, I don't know why you wouldn't believe me. If I said I won it and 8 other people said that they won it, then I would think, yeah, you're not justified in believing me. But given that
A lot of this goes back to struggles that we've had in previous book clubs, and I don't want to put the blame on you for that, but with the whole David Hume thing. And so we did a book with John Loftus maybe a year and a half ago on the case against miracles. It was an anthology that he put together. We had him on just like you are now, and we talked about that. And it does seem like is was previously pointed out, it seems like that Hume, to me, is stacking the deck. So miracles are improbable. And in fact, as you point out in your book, if it was probable, they're not miracles anymore. It has to be improbable. So the wise person is always going to be more justified in believing the natural occurrence because the math's always going to win on that argument. And so it's never going to be prudent to believe in a miracle just because they're so rare. And now he does. Now I think he was in his 20s when he wrote that. And so it's certainly not the level of rigor that you see in his later life, I think. But it still seems like he's begging the question a lot. He'll refer to things, and it seems like your book kind of is based on some, and I want to get your feedback. Let me do this first. How much does your argument rely on Hume? Is it similar to Hume's, or is it very different than Hume's? Were you simplifying Hume, or were you improving Hume?
Hume was certainly an inspiration for my argument, for my book. I'm a great admirer of Hume's philosophy. Now, you could say that Hume is begging the question because he assigns a very low probability to miracles, and if miracles have a low probability, then the burden for justification becomes that much harder to achieve.
I think what he says is the uniform experience is always going to be is always the natural. That's the uniform experience that we have. So therefore, it always makes the miracle improbable. And so again, and I think C.S. Lewis pointed this out too, if that is indeed the uniform experience of all humanity, that miracles don't happen, well, then miracles have never happened. Okay, so yeah, if what you said is true, then yeah, it follows that there are no miracles. That becomes impossible because our uniform human experience has already proven that. But the fact that there's claims for miracles, however, shows that is not the uniform position. And so it's again, I just wanted to know how you would differentiate yours, and if you were aware of some of the more recent, like John Ehrman's work, the Hume's abject failure, the argument against miracles. So you have like an atheist philosopher that really kind of took him apart on that, and there's been several Christians as well make the same argument. Plantinga, I think, and several others. I just didn't know if you had interacted. Some of this was after you wrote your book, so I don't know.
Well, Ehrman's book came out decades ago. I'd encourage you to read a response to Ehrman's book by a philosopher named Robert Fogelin, Fogelin. When I wouldn't put things exactly the way you were, but I'm sensitive to the criticism you're making. So neither Hume nor I want to say that miracles are impossible. We want to say that having a justified belief in a miracle is impossible. And I don't think that begs the question because, as I said, having a justified belief in whether it rained on this day 2,000 years ago in Madison, Wisconsin is not possible. There's some beliefs that we simply can't justify. And I think beliefs in miracles are among those beliefs that we can't justify.
Mm-hmm. So, and the back to your lottery ticket will lose false belief at some point. That does become a justified belief, or at what point does that switch over? Is it a whole new set of evidence that doesn't rely on probabilities alone or something?
Well, so let's say I'm playing the lottery. I have a belief that I'll lose. My belief's justified because my chance of winning is, say, only 1 in a million. And then I pull a ticket with a winning number, or what I think is the winning number. I might not believe my eyes. Could I really be so lucky? And then I will check my number 3 times against the number on the television. I'll have my friends say, "Am I seeing this right?" And happily, after running through all the tests that I think I need before becoming, letting myself go to my elation, at some point I'll say, now I'm justified and believing that I won the lottery. And I'm so glad that my justified belief that I would lose was false.
So when the ACH deposit in your account is no longer pending, at that point it becomes justified.
Right.
Okay,
well, James, I think maybe to help your case, in the lottery maybe not be the best example because we know that somebody always wins the lottery, but we don't know that miracles ever happen. That's not something that is given that everybody agrees on. But maybe a better analogy would be if an alien showed up and visited somewhere. Like if that really happened, it's still an open question whether, number one, aliens exist, and number two, whether they could reach us here in our world. And so if it did happen, that seems more analogous to what you're trying to get at, Jesus' resurrection. It's like if it did happen, it seems like unfair. It's like I think I've heard kind of a complaint in your aspect when we talk about this. It's like, well, it's not fair if it did happen, we can't justify it. It's like,
well, no, yeah, I don't know that that's exactly what I'm trying to say, but what I'm trying to say is that there should be a way that we can have a justified right belief on things that actually did happen. So even if you have to wait till that clears or something, the idea of the improbability means that it's not justified. Well, a lot of improbable things happen every day. So I'm trying to find a better way than just saying the odds were stacked against it. Therefore, we're not justified in believing it happened. I'd like to see the Cowboys win the Super Bowl too, but that's probably not a justified belief.
Nor is it true.
That's why I gave 2 amens.
Yeah,
So-
it
so-
happened 3 times in the
I mean,
first
part
2 years.
of the difficulty and the issues with which we're wrestling now is trying to understand what improbability actually is. So it's one thing to say that I might get a forecast that the chance of rain tomorrow is 70%. So now I have a credence of 0.7 that it's going to rain tomorrow. And then you might ask me, what's the probability that a raindrop will land on this precise location on the sidewalk? And I'm going to say that's very improbable. So on the one hand, it's probably going to rain. On the other hand, it's very improbable that a given raindrop is going to fall in a given location. So when talking about the resurrection, we're saying that it's very improbable that someone who's living will then die and then come back to life. And the basis for thinking that that's improbable is because we have very well documented cases of many people dying and not coming back to life. So that makes that improbable, I think. Just trying to remember the other point I want to make. Just that the sad fact is there are many things that have happened in the world, that will happen in the world, that will never be justified in believing had happened or will happen, even though they had happened or will happen. That's just because we're epistemically finite beings, not in possession of all the evidence that would be required to justify.
So like Hume, you're saying you're not saying that miracles are impossible.
That's right.
You're saying they're highly improbable. Yeah. Is there a resurrection? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm saying I don't know how to argue that they're impossible, but I do know how to argue that we're not justified in believing that they occurred.
Right. But that is largely based on the probability. If 1% of all humans came back alive 3 days later, then we would be justified in believing the resurrection of Jesus, because 1% of humans do that regularly.
Well, yeah, I'd be much more comfortable with the idea that Jesus was resurrected if 1% of humans came back to life. Just like if I learned that a disease affected 1% of the population, and someone told me that they had this disease, I'd think, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that you're among that 1% of the population." Now, if
do you have you quantified that in any way? Like on the resurrection, it's highly improbable. 1 in 100 million, 1 in 10,000. Have you quantified that in any way?
I don't know how to quantify it, but look, we have there are now, I think, more people alive today than have been alive in the history of the world, and I bet you they're all going to die. Let's put the improbability at least at 1 in 8 billion.
1 in 8 billion. Okay.
I mean, just because we've got 8 billion data points.
You're saying there's a chance.
Yeah, right.
Better,
Just like I'm not justified in believing I bought the winning lottery ticket, I'm not justified in believing that this person came back to life.
Hey, Phil, it looked like you had a question. I'm trying to read the text as we go.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, Phil, did you want to unmute and make a comment or question?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I would like to bring up. Hi, Larry. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for listening.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I listened to your interview with Daniel Ray
in
preparation for this, and I have to apologize. I haven't read the book yet. So, and I understand the frustration being an author when people don't read your books. So.
Authors are used to that.
So as a fellow author, I need to apologize because I don't like it when people don't read my books.
Okay.
I have 6 of them, and I don't like, and so I always feel bad when I tell someone that I haven't read their book. but it's just a matter of economy, and everybody's like that, so.
Mhm.
But I did listen to your interview, and I just based on a couple things that I've heard tonight, I just wanted to just kind of weigh in on a couple of them. First of all, I think this idea that 2,000 years ago, people just walked around believing that human beings rose from the dead on a routine basis, or that if you were to tell somebody that somebody rose from the dead, that nobody would be shocked, and it would be pretty much in line with their cultural ethos to believe that. And I would just say that is simply historically false. The in Hellenistic culture, if you said, hey, so and so rose from the dead, their response would be, why would anybody want to rise from the dead? This earthly life it sucks. Why would anybody want to come back and live it again, or anything like that? And so there was no routine idea in Hellenistic culture that people just rose from the dead, just and it was just commonplace. In Jewish culture,
it was commonplace. It was
okay,
not unheard of. I mean, the Emperor Vespasian,
Lazarus, John the Baptist,
yeah,
widow of Nain. There's several, but yeah, not many.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would argue that those claims are not claims where someone actually claimed that someone had physically risen from the dead and that they had eyewitness testimony to the fact. Those were more like mythological claims, and they were not mainstream. But in Jewish culture, no one in Jewish culture believed that individuals rose from the dead. In Jewish culture, in Jewish culture, the resurrection of the dead came at the end of time. And in Jewish culture, the concept of someone rising from the dead, an individual rising from the dead in history prior to the end of the age, the end of time, was just simply absurd to the Jewish mind. And
Just on that, just a clarification, Phil. Now there were in the Torah. I mean, there are in the Old Testament stories of, maybe it's not resurrection, maybe it's a resuscitation or something, but you do have people coming, a couple of cases of people coming back from the dead in the Old Testament.
Okay, I'm not familiar with where that is. I mean, the witch of Endor supposedly brought Samuel back.
Elijah and Elisha.
There was no resurrection for either one of those.
Elisha raised the widow's son.
The widow's son, I think. Who was the prophet?
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that this it just sounds like that these stories were just they were believable to people in those cultures, and I just take a big issue with that even if some of those stories were circulating, they were exceptions to the rules, and they were not something that those cultures were willing to just accept willy-nilly. But even if, let's grant that they were, even if they were, I don't see any logical connection between people told stories of people rising from the dead in those cultures 2,000 years ago to all the way to there is no evidence that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. There's no believable evidence that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. I mean, those two things are logically disconnected. There's no logical connection between people told stories about rising from the dead in that culture 2,000 years ago with there is no credible evidence for the resurrection of Christ. And so to me, that's just a complete non sequitur at that point. But the other thing that I am kind of struggling with here is I'm hearing that there are other explanations that are better explanations for the claim that Jesus rose from the dead than a miraculous claim where the laws of nature were suspended or overturned, or that they were, that they were simply superseded. But I'm not hearing a reason why those are better explanations. And it seems to me that the only reason that you would think that certain explanations that were not the same as the biblical, as the historical claims were, is a prior commitment to naturalism. So people don't go around rising from the dead, and so therefore there's no credible evidence that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. That's also a non sequitur. I don't see any logical connection between those either. And I argue in my book, Machines Don't Laugh, that naturalism is actually self-defeating. And if naturalism is self-defeating, then a prior commitment to naturalism can't be the reason why you don't think that there is good evidence for the resurrection of Christ. That's a huge vat of begging the question at that point. So that's kind of where I'm sitting. And that was the problem that C.S. Lewis had with David Hume. And C.S. Lewis was famous for saying the reason that we don't believe, or the only way that we could know that no claim of a miracle in the past is valid or is true is to know ahead of time that miracles don't occur. But we would only be able to know that miracles don't occur if we knew that all claims of miracles in the past are false. And in fact, we'd be arguing in a circle. And so I see a lot of circularity here, and it's not very persuasive for me, I guess. It's hard for me to really get on board with some of these, and to say to open a claim with the phrase "it just seems to me." When you open a claim with those words, you're not presenting an argument at that point. No logical argument is based on an introduction of saying it just seems to me. You have to have an argument that these explanations are better than the miraculous explanation. You can't just say, well, it just seems to me that these are better arguments, that these are better explanations, because it seems to me that they're not better explanations because I don't have a prior commitment to naturalism.
So are you willing to accept any claim of a fantastic thing that goes on?
Am I willing to accept any claim of a fantastic
occurrence, like the resurrection that Elijah performed, or Vespasian's curing blindness, or does anything go for you?
Well, my whole approach is that if someone comes along and claims some kind of fantastic event or something, then I simply ask for evidence. And I don't ask for evidence that's any better than evidence for anything else. I don't ask for evidence for the resurrection of Christ that happens to be more extraordinary than the evidence that Caesar conquered Gaul, because the evidence for both of them is either sufficient or it's insufficient. And so the idea that the evidence for a fantastic claim has to itself be fantastic is a fallacy of composition. And it's
a mathematical truth that the less probable an event, the more evidence you need to establish its truth. That's just, it follows as a result of probability theory. And so here's an example.
I don't agree with that, but that's okay.
Okay, but
I don't
recommend you read the book. I would recommend you read at least the first half of his book, because he gets into a mathematical argument that to me is very convincing. It has nothing to do with the resurrection or the miraculous. It's more about probabilities of positive diagnosis for a rare disease. And to me, that's very convincing. If anybody here hasn't read that, I think it would be good if Dr. Shapiro could give us a kind of a brief explanation of that? Because that, to me, that was convincing.
Well, we
Yeah.
can take the lottery analogy, for example. So it's highly improbable that I would win a lottery ticket tomorrow and I would win $1 billion or $1 million or something like that. That's extremely improbable. Why is the evidence that I won that lottery ticket, why does it have to be more expansive than the evidence that I won a lottery ticket where I won $10? The evidence that I won a lottery ticket for a certain amount of money is the same evidence for whether or not I won a lottery ticket for a different amount of money. The only evidence is I have to just simply have sufficient evidence that I won a lottery ticket. And the amount that I won may be less probable than the amount that somebody else won, but the evidence for both of them is no different from each other. You know, I mean, all I have to do is present the lottery ticket and here's the number, and that's the evidence.
Those aren't differences in probability in the relevant sense of probability. And as Ken pointed out earlier, the lottery example is not a perfect example because there has to be a winner. But so here's an example I just discuss in my book, Phil, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about this. We imagine a first grader. I think I call her Sally in the book. I don't recall exactly, but call her Sally. And we imagine that Sally is a typically reliable witness. So when Sally tells us that her teacher was sick and a substitute teacher filled in for the day, we think, well, Sally's typically reliable. Yeah, I believe her. When Sally says there was a fire alarm in school today, we know that, okay, that sounds plausible. I'll believe Sally. Now, a teacher becoming sick and a fire alarm are things that are infrequent, but they happen. Now, when Sally says to us that there is an alien invasion in school today, Sally's not less reliable. We can stipulate that she's got a constant kind of reliability, but alien invasions don't happen frequently. They're very improbable. And so now when Sally reports to us an alien invasion, we should doubt that she's telling us the truth. We shouldn't doubt her because she's less reliable. We should doubt her because what she's reporting is so fantastic, so improbable. And so the idea is that these people who claim to have seen Jesus resurrected, they might be reasonably reliable people. We're confident we can trust them when they tell us what they had for dinner that night, who their friends are, that kind of stuff. But when they tell us that someone was resurrected, because resurrection is such an, I think, improbable event, we now have reason to discount the reliability of their evidence.
I have a follow-up from the book when we're ready to move on to the next.
Before that, Daniel, did Larry, did you want to try to share the analogy that you used about the disease and the math that Ken was referring to? Could you share that with everybody?
Well, if people want to hear it.
Yeah.
Well, before we do that, can I respond to what Larry said real quick?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think what's happening here is that they were taking various claims, and we're only considering those claims in a one-dimensional fashion. We're only considering them on the basis of probability. That's the only consideration for considering Sally's claim of alien invasion or that the teacher was sick or whatever. But probability cannot be just an isolated consideration here. We have to take our worldview into consideration. We have to, first of all, there has to be a consideration as to whether or not naturalism is a viable and feasible worldview. And if naturalism is false, then claims of resurrection are much more accessible and we're going to be more willing to examine evidence because of the fact that we know that naturalism is self-defeating and therefore false. And so there's no historical, or there's no worldview context where Sally's claim of an alien invasion makes sense. It's just simply just out of the blue, completely out of context, can just coming out of thin air, and the only consideration is whether or not her claim is probable or not. But I don't think that we can just assess all these things on the basis of simply one consideration, and that is it probable or improbable? So the resurrection, the evidence for the resurrection of Christ doesn't exist in a historical vacuum. But Sally's claim that the alien invasion existed, that exists in a complete vacuum. It exists in a historical vacuum, and it exists in a worldview vacuum. And if we had lots of evidence that aliens existed and had planned on or had told people that there was going to be an invasion, then Sally's claim is a little bit more credible, and we might be willing to take it more seriously. So there has to be a much, much broader context to consider these things other than just the one-dimensional consideration of probability, as far as I'm concerned. So I'll shut up.
It sounds like you're now adopting the position that you accused me of begging the question with, where you're saying, well, let's just adopt a worldview where people can be resurrected, and now it's not improbable that he was resurrected.
No, because I'm a Christian. I'm an evangelical Christian, and if someone says, "Hey, did Jesus rise from the dead?" There's two answers that I could give them. The first answer I would give them is probably not, because it is improbable that Jesus rose from the dead. But the other answer is, but does that make it false? Does that mean that there's no evidence in favor of it? Does that mean there's no good and credible evidence in favor of it? And so that's the other side of the coin, and that changes things dramatically, because I think there is good evidence for the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. It's not just some obscure claim somewhere that could be written off as a hallucination or a dream or something like that. There is a valid historical context in which this claim is made, and it is not simply something that you can just write off as being improbable, and therefore we're not justified in believing it or even considering the possibility that it might have existed. So I'm not begging the question. I'm adopting a framework in which we need to examine evidence in a comprehensive way, not just based on one single consideration. And I think if we do that, then we're limiting ourselves to an epistemic vacuum at that point. And we're just saying, well, I'm not going to believe that Jesus rose from the dead because it's just so improbable. And I'm not going to believe that Jesus rose from the dead because I have a prior commitment to naturalism, and I believe that nobody rises from the dead, and that it's not possible for that to occur. So these things.
Again, I'm not making a claim about possibility. But so we agree that Jesus's resurrection was an improbable event.
Mm-hmm.
You're confident that we have overwhelming evidence that it actually occurred. And so you think when we employ inference to the best explanation, we're just compelled to accept that the evidence is so good for his resurrection that he was actually resurrected. And my claim is that I can think of dozens of alternative explanations for why we have these reports that are all at least good.
Okay, but the problem is that what I'm hearing is these alternate explanations are just as good. But I'm not hearing an argument.
Better, but
I'm not hearing an argument. I'm not hearing an argument that establishes that they're better. I'm just hearing, it seems to me that these are better explanations. So there's a big difference.
Yeah, okay. How about this? We've heard other people reporting fantastic events, and they've turned out to be wrong.
But they didn't have the kind of historical attestation that the resurrection does. They're just somebody who pops up out of nowhere, just like your little girl in the school, who popped up out of nowhere and just makes a claim just out of thin air. And there isn't a broad narrative of testimony. There isn't things that need to be explained, and the explanation that this did not happen doesn't explain all the facts. There's this minimal facts argument that I think that people should not ignore. A lot of these explanations, they don't account for the empty tomb. A lot of the explanations don't account for the fact that there were multiple eyewitnesses, and that there are eyewitnesses, that those testimonies corroborate each other, and that they're so there are lots of considerations involved that make this much different, categorically different, fundamentally different than just somebody popping up and say, hey, Joe Bob rose from the dead yesterday, with no historical evidence, no reasons why we should believe it. And I think what's happening is that you're taking this claim of Jesus rising from the dead, and you're saying it's just the same as somebody just popping up out of nowhere and just saying that Joe Bob rose from the dead yesterday. And I just think there is a fundamental difference between those two, and I don't think those two can be compared in any meaningful way. So there are so many more broad considerations involved, and that's why I don't think that without an argument that says this is a better explanation, I'm just not very moved. That doesn't move the needle for me, because I want to hear an argument as to why this is a better explanation.
Well, we know people make things up either because they're mendacious or because they're ignorant or confused. This happens all the time. We know. I don't know whether you believe in the Book of Mormon, because that has a lot of testimony on its behalf and witnesses. I don't know whether you believe in the Roman gods. There are certainly lots of people reporting contact with Roman gods.
Yeah.
Same with Greek gods. I don't know whether you believe in reincarnation, because there are a lot of people who claim to have experienced reincarnation or met people who have been reincarnated.
But the evidence that they are presenting is categorically different than the evidence for the resurrection. The evidence for the resurrection can't be dismissed as just somebody reporting a dream or reporting a vision without a whole framework of evidence that all contributes to the conclusion. These things, the things that you're citing, are just people who are ignorant, people who are superstitious. Well, those ignorant and superstitious people are not coming up with the quality of evidence that we have for the resurrection. They're simply fundamentally different. And I just can't compare the two.
I don't think there's anything especially I don't think there's anything special about the evidence that was cited in the Gospels, written 70 years after Jesus' death.
Well, the evidence and the claims were within 5 years.
Can we get something out of the book? I've got something tied to that in relation to the book. But Larry, did you want to explain the mathematical thing that we've been talking about since the beginning? I want to give you a chance to do that.
No, only if people want to hear it.
Yeah. No, please.
Okay. The idea is this. Suppose you have a test for a disease, and you're told that the disease is the test is 99% reliable. And I'm not using these terms in a statistically sound way, but the idea is that the test will be wrong one in 100 times. Okay, so you're concerned about having this disease, pustulitis, which is this fictitious disease that gives you pustules and makes you incontinent and does all sorts of terrible things to you. And so you're concerned you have it. So you take the test. You're told that you're tested positive, 99% reliable. And so the question is, what do you do? Do you take the treatment for the disease? And let's suppose the treatment is itself a terrible thing, but you really don't want that disease. And so you wonder to yourself, well, what's the probability that I have this disease? The test is 99% reliable. So you think, well, there's a 99% chance. But what you actually can't answer the question, what's the chance you have this disease, unless you know something about what's called the base rate of the disease, which is the percentage of the population that actually will have this disease. So if you learn that the disease is very improbable, say only 1 in 10,000 people have it, and Ken, you're going to have to crunch these numbers for me because I can't do it in my head right now, but so thinking about it this way. So 10,000 people is what is it? 100 groups of 100 people. Okay, so if we know that 1 in 10,000 has this disease, then we know that in one of these groups of 100 people, there is a person with a disease, right? Stop me if this gets confusing because it's so counterintuitive. Okay, so we've got 100 groups, each with 100 people. That's our 10,000. We know that 1 in a population of 10,000 will have this disease. So we know that there's 1 person in one of these groups of 100 that has this disease. But my test is 99% reliable. That means it's wrong 1 time in 100. So that means in each of those other groups of 100 people, groups that don't have anyone with a disease, my test will misidentify one and say, there's someone in this group with a disease. So at the end of the day, we're told that 100 people have this disease from our test when only 1 does. So a test that's 99% reliable will be wrong 99 times out of 100 about who has this disease if the disease is uncommon. And so then the application of this idea in the book is, if we think of resurrection as improbable, and Phil and I agreed about that. I think it's the only thing we agreed about. But then we have to ask, what's the chance that these witnesses were correct in reporting that Jesus resurrected, was in fact resurrected? And if they're only 99% reliable, which is much more reliable than most witnesses, and the probability that someone is resurrected is remote, 1 in a million, say, then their testimony is pretty much worthless.
So I have a question, if I may. So if it's 1 chance in 10,000, why are you breaking it up into 100 groups?
I'm just to sort of make more intuitive why it is that the diagnostic test, which is 99% reliable, goes wrong. So in saying it's 99% reliable, what I have in mind is something like 1 time in 100, it will be wrong. And it will say of someone who does not have the disease that they have it. So now let's ask how many times it will go wrong if 10,000 people take this test. Well, 10,000 is 100 groups of 100. So it'll go wrong in every one of those 100 groups, except for the one that actually has the diseased person. So
yeah, I understood the example, but my question remains, if it's 1 in 10,000, why break it up into 100 groups?
Well, we don't have to. We can just say that of the 10,000 individuals, 99 of them will test positive for having the disease, even though they don't have it.
And I think the point is that the rarer something is, the less you can be confident about a positive result. And then you bridge from the disease diagnosis to witness, even seemingly reliable witnesses, 99% reliable. And then it washes away the effect of that positive testimony and makes it likely that it's false positive.
I would just suggest one thing, and this is going to sound a little shocking, a little bit out there. As far as I'm concerned, the evidence for the resurrection of Christ has nothing to do with the reliability of the witnesses. It has to do with the reliability of the testimony itself. So you don't test the witnesses, you don't test how reliable these witnesses are and how right they are and how many times they're right and how many times they're wrong. You take their testimony and the testimony that they made public, and you put that testimony to the test. Doesn't matter how reliable those witnesses are. What happens is those witnesses go out there and they spread this testimony around the whole Mediterranean world. And if that testimony doesn't stand up on its own, regardless of who the witness was, then nobody's going to believe that testimony. And they knew that. They knew that if this wasn't true, that they would never get away with going out there and trying to proclaim it to the world, because it would be slapped down in no time. If they said the tomb was empty, the Romans, all that testimony was discredited. All the people that were supposedly reliable witnesses of that, they came forward later and said they lied. So that's not really a good comparison. But those people in the first century, they were confident enough that the testimony that they were relating to the Roman, the Mediterranean world, they were confident enough in that testimony that they knew that they would not be able to get away with it if they went out there and gave the world a false testimony that could easily be disproven. And it would have been easily disproven. The Romans could have gone out and found that body. To think that the Romans would not have been able to find the body of Jesus is just simply absurd and inconceivable. That is more improbable than the idea that Jesus rose from the dead.
No, it's not.
Well, I want to let me interject here with along these lines of the testimony that we do have, Larry, in relation to something in your book. It's on page 113 and 114. And I think it was something I wanted to talk to you about when we did our interview. I don't think it actually came up, but I want to read the quote and then just have you comment, and I'll just kind of let you have the last word there. It's on the bottom of page 113. It's getting into the evidence that is generally presented for the Christian faith. And of course, that is central. The central piece that we know of Jesus comes from the scriptures, mostly the New Testament, specifically the Gospels. And you say the men who followed Jesus around also couldn't or didn't write anything. They were fishermen, day laborers, and tax collectors. We thus have no written record from Jesus or anyone associated with Jesus of anything Jesus said or did during his lifetime. If you turn the page on page 114, I'm skipping a little bit, but you say that you continue and say the best evidence suggests that the Gospels were written 35 to 65 years after Jesus's death. We will probably never know who wrote them. The names of the Gospels have nothing to do, excuse me, with the names of the authors. Could you expand on how you came to those conclusions?
Reading historians. I mean, I didn't do this research.
Yeah.
I think Bart Ehrman makes this point. I think
yeah, you have Richard Carrier. You said
Blaine Pagels makes this point.
Yeah. So you're just taking what they're saying, and they're saying that the men who followed Jesus around didn't write anything, and you accept that explanation. Is that true? Is that correct?
I had no reason to doubt the credentials of these historians. Yeah.
Okay. So if how do we test that? How do we know that the people that followed Jesus around didn't write anything? Like it just your plain knowledge, not going back to history or however you want to explain that. How could we know that they didn't write anything when we have things in writing? How do we know this?
Well, we have historians who study ancient Roman culture, and they can tell us something about the availability of education, the sorts of classes that were likely to be educated. And so we come up with justification for the idea that it's likely that the people who were Jesus's followers, they weren't wealthy people, they weren't educated people, assuming that they were your typical Roman.
Okay, and then you said we don't have any written record, but that seems to be, I mean, we do have written records. We have the Bible. So I wasn't sure what you were saying there. I just wanted some clarification. That's all. The Bible. So does the Bible not count as a written record, or does it? Because you had said in the beginning that you had affirmed the historicity of Jesus, and so I was wondering if that's coming from the New Testament or somewhere else. If you don't think we actually have a written record,
the Gospels weren't written until well after Jesus's death.
Yeah, there were several decades afterwards, sure, but are they not? Are they for you? Are they the sources of Jesus's life, or is it something else that gives Jesus's life historicity?
I think
actually,
the question is who authored them. Was it Jesus' companions that authored them, or was it somebody later who was more educated?
Well, yeah, I didn't know what he meant by we have no written record from Jesus from anyone.
I mean, think about the difference between someone like Jesus and someone like Socrates. So Socrates also walked around and had a group of followers. But the difference between one difference between Socrates and Jesus was that among Socrates' followers were people like Xenophon and Plato, who kept careful records of what Socrates actually said, and these would be corroborated in various ways. And we didn't have that with Jesus.
We didn't have textual corroboration.
We didn't have Jesus's followers recording in a very sort of diary-like fashion the events going on in Jesus's life. And I'm not sure what direction you're going with this, but even if we did, I'm not sure why that should reduce our suspicions that they were correct when they reported that he had been resurrected.
Well, I think what Phil said earlier, that the evidence that we have is coming out of the New Testament. I mean, primarily there's extra biblical stuff, but primarily the evidence for the resurrection, the textual evidence for the resurrection, comes out of the New Testament, as you know. But I think to what Phil was trying to say earlier is your counterexamples to what may have happened don't have what we have with the Gospels. We don't even have any textual evidence of the alternative possibilities. So on what basis are your objections as good as New Testament record?
And the other problem here is that the Gospels.
Well, let him answer that, Phil.
Okay. Well, this is relevant.
Yeah. No. Go ahead, Larry. Go ahead.
Yeah. The idea is that we have this New Testament written by people who sincerely believed that Jesus was resurrected decades after he was resurrected, and we know that people will report the most amazing things. It happens frequently. And in this case, though, it seems like you want to believe what's being reported in the New Testament. You think
not really. Actually, I don't.
Okay. But you do.
Same here.
No, it's not my human nature to want to believe that. Honestly,
no, you do believe it, though.
But I do believe it. But
right.
There are days I would rather it not be true.
What do you see in the evidence before you that you think makes it of such high quality that you're willing to adopt a belief that Jesus was God and live your life in a way that you think Jesus would have wanted to live it, when we have other occurrences taking place in the course of history of no less incredible stories with no better evidence that you just reject.
So can you give me
There's-
a specific example? Like you want to talk about Mormonism, maybe, or because
I don't know if
because
Mormonism
it's hard
is
to address the there's all these other things out there. So I want to be textually specific here with the New Testament and give you and stick here and not just say, well, there's all these other things out there.
Okay,
Well, let's look at let's narrow it down to the actual New Testament text itself and say, why is this more credible than anything else? What is it about this text that is that makes so many Christians want to accept what's in it, for example? And so I think one key characteristic is that if you are you familiar with Northanger Abbey, the Jane Austen's novel? I
don't know that novel. But.
Okay, well, I won't use that example, but these things were circulating 30 to 60 years after the events that were recorded. They were events that took place in and around first century Temple Judaism, the pinnacle of Judaic tradition and law and ritual. And there's specifically named Roman potentates, Pilate and the Herods, Agrippa and Festus, the porticos, the details in the Gospels themselves, in the book of Acts. Luke is used as by historians of the early first century ancient Near East as a primary source, Luke and Acts, because he got so many details right, including the mastheads of the ship upon which he and Paul traveled, Castor and Pollux. So there's all these little details and coincidences and things. And C.S. Lewis said himself, he said, look, I love mythology. The Gospels are not mythology. They're not written well enough to be mythology. They're not written to try to impress people. In fact, there's so many instances where it's self-deprecating. The disciples don't even recognize Jesus along the road to Emmaus. Before the women come to the disciples, they tell the disciples that Jesus had risen and they thought it was foolish talk. After the resurrection in Matthew records that some doubted. Caiaphas, the high priest, is named. He tears his robe. The temple is destroyed. Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple. This stuff doesn't get off the ground. It's like somebody writing about 9/11 and denying that the Twin Towers fell. This stuff doesn't get off the ground in first century Jerusalem unless something really happened. It's really hard to imagine, and I'm not saying this is an argument from incredulity, that people centuries after, in a land that wasn't even around that time period, could have concocted this story and passed it off as true. And so the internal consistency of the Gospels themselves, even in places where it is contrary and embarrassing maybe to the central message, even Jesus' death on a cross, this is not exaltation mythology, the exaltation of the Jews. This is the fierce persecution of the Romans. These texts survived the first and second centuries of being handed down carefully over time through tradition, Paul, James, Peter, and John, in Jerusalem. And so I think that for me, I'm like, what's the best counter argument as to why these specific texts made it out of Jerusalem and were believed, if in fact the disciples were mistaken about the resurrection? What is the best counter argument for what really happened? And what is the evidence for that counter argument that shows this is more plausible than a resurrection? Instead of just hypothesizing about things, what actual evidence do we have for these alternative hypotheses?
And the other thing that we need to
let him finish.
Oh, I didn't know this. I don't know it was a question.
Yeah, no, just let him answer whatever he wants to respond to.
We know.
I'm done.
We know people are credulous. We know that people often believe what they want to believe. We know that, take QAnon. If there's ever a bunch of crazy theories, it's QAnon. How has QAnon spread so widely? People really believe that there's a cabal of pedophile Democrats who are grooming children for world takeover. People believe this. What's their evidence? I don't know. Some crazy guy named Q spewing this bullshit, and people believe it. Now you're going to say, well, what explains that? It's that people believe what they want to believe.
Yeah, the problem is,
this, guys, this is the most interesting part of the conversation just about, but I do have to break in because our time is almost up, and I did want to give Bill a chance to come on. Bill is our co-founder with me, and we've been doing this for going on 7 years now. And Bill, you want to unmute and come on and let them know why you're not hosting today, co-hosting.
You know, I've become a theist, and as a theist, I just go with what the Bible says. No. So I wanted to ask a question. One of my favorite passages is Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman, where Jesus, she goes, "Hey, can you heal me?" Jesus seems to ignore her, being a little rude. And she goes, he goes, "Why should I give the children's pearls to the dogs?" And she says, "Well, even the dogs have the crumbs." And then, surprisingly enough, he does heal her. So he is a little bit xenophobic, a little bit misogynistic, a little bit of a jerk. So it's kind of an embarrassing situation. So my question to you, Larry, is, doesn't it have a little bit of a, aura verisimilitude? I mean, it says he does heal her, and the other stuff is kind of negative toward Jesus and embarrassing. Does that, it seems like it could be a real historical account. Does it seem that way to you, Larry?
It might have been an historical. This is after Jesus had been resurrected or before?
Before.
Yeah, I don't doubt the historicity of Jesus, and it's possible that some of what was reported about what he had done during his life, he'd actually done.
But is it unlikely? It does say that he changed his mind and he healed her. If you were making it up, wouldn't you just say, "Oh, Jesus says, oh, of course you're healed. Oh, yeah, boy, thanks for coming by." It just makes him look like such a jerk. So, do you see what I'm saying? It has that aura of truthfulness about it.
Not really.
I wanted to convince you that. Suppose I wanted to write in a way that would convince you that Jesus was God. Wouldn't I want to try to write in a way that had that sort of verisimilitude?
That's the question. That's what's killing me. Do the gospel writers have that ability to be nuanced? Are they that good? Are they?
They're just Iron Age goat herders, remember?
Or was it really seen as negative to be xenophobic in that context?
See, these things are written. These things are not written by people who just want to believe whatever they want to believe. We actually have the historical record that these were not credulous people. They were very incredulous. Take Thomas, for example. He said, "I'm not going to believe until I get some verification here." And they all had the initial reaction of, "Are you?" Because we have the historical record of it.
Who wrote that historical record?
Well, if someone writes down a bunch of narratives in a historical record that are not true, then someone's going to come out and they're going to say, "Hey, I was there, and that never happened." And the other thing is that the Gospels were in their present form may not have been written until around 60 AD or whatever the time frame is. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a written account of what Jesus did, that those Gospels were actually formed from. And there were lots of literate people around that followed Jesus around. Matthew was a tax collector, and he was with Jesus from a very early time of Jesus' ministry. And Matthew was a tax collector, and if you're a tax collector, you've got to be very literate, because he's got to keep records of the people that are paying taxes and all these kinds of things. So Matthew was perfectly capable of writing things down. He was perfectly literate. So this idea that the Gospels in their present form weren't written until the 60s doesn't mean that there wasn't anything written down prior to that, and that the Gospels didn't draw from from a lot of these sources and a lot of these things that were written down prior to that. And there were
made that similar argument, Phil. So you're not the only one that's made that argument about that. Maybe they did have some literacy.
Hey,
Kelly,
let me do this, Bill. Let me just kind of
Kelly.
wrap a little bit because we are about out of time. And so for those who didn't catch the news, as many of us know, Bill has been struggling with his atheism for the last little over a year, and has come to a point to where last week he made the announcement, and I'll put the video up if you'll want to watch it. As soon as we go off the air, I'm going to put it in the Friends of the Atheist and Christian Book Club Facebook group. I'll put it there. But basically, he has acknowledged that he is no longer an atheist. He's a theist. He said he was not certain about Jesus or where he stands on who God is, but that he has come to the position now that he believes that there is a God, that there is a creator. And so this is why he kind of recused himself. He's not really, this is the Atheist and Christian Book Club, and Bill's in no man's land right now, neither an atheist nor a Christian necessarily, but certainly seems to be leaning that way, Bill. I want to encourage you in the area of Christianity. But if anybody had a question for Bill and where he is right now, where I know we're almost out of time, and as soon as we're through with that very quickly, I'll announce next month's book club and who our guest author is. So any questions for Bill on going from atheism to theism?
This is a first for the club, everybody. We've never had a convert one way or the other. We've never had the needle moved. So
welcome back.
Yay.
Hey, by the way, I want to thank Kelly. Thank you, Kelly, for taking.
Yes, thank you, Kelly.
That's really nice of you. Yeah. Did you, on that Syrophoenician woman, did you have a comment?
I did. I was going to say that Mary Janes don't make for good genre. I mean, when you write a character that's perfect, that doesn't make for good literature.
Okay.
Yeah. On that previous comment that was made about Mormonism, I didn't want to get into it, but that's my background, fourth generation Melchizedek priesthood holder, baptism for the dead in the Salt Lake City Temple, everything. And I did have to ask that question about, is the lack of evidence and the issue, is it the same as Christianity and Mormonism, just two versions of the same story? And, obviously I came to the position that it was significantly different in comparison. And one of those issues was that the characters in the Book of Mormon are paper thin. They're either very, very good or very, very bad. It doesn't have that sense that you're getting the faux pas and the mistakes of real people. It is heroes and villains, and it's very, very shallow in its character development.
We can't hear you, Ken.
Yeah, you're muted a little bit, Ken.
I was just saying I completely agree with you on those points, James. The only reason I mentioned Joseph Smith is because even in the teeth of countervailing evidence, people still believe. So the idea that just because somebody is spewing falsehoods, that it could be exposed and that would squelch unbelief in the bud, or whatever the expression is, that's a false premise. I mean, people believe.
Agreed, Ken. And I'll add to that.
That wasn't my argument. That wasn't my argument.
That watching Mormon apologists, obviously I disagree with them, and I do a lot interact with. I've debated one of the top Mormon apologists, but I also listen to the arguments thinking, am I making a similar kind of category mistake or something in my Christian apologetics? So if you see enough bad apologetics, then maybe you can see some in the mirror as well. So I try to improve my game a little bit by not making those kinds of errors. So I do agree with Larry that there's things that we can learn from people we disagree with. Even my Mormon friends, I can learn a lot from them. Hopefully that'll apply to that. Let me just make an announcement. I'm not going to put it up on the board. I beg your pardon?
Even though Bill has gone to the dark side, he's still my friend. He'll always be my friend.
Well, he's not fully there. He's just a deist. There's still hope.
Hey, if we have,
Become a
if
Christian.
we can take an extra minute, Joel has a question, and Joel usually doesn't say much.
Joel has good questions. Let's
He
get Joel's
does.
question and
Yeah.
then I'll wrap up.
Okay.
Joel, unmute and join in.
I mean, I know it's late, so if everyone needs to turn in or um, if you have time, Larry, otherwise,
Yeah, sure.
okay. So, I was skimming the book throughout this meeting. Sorry for not reading it beforehand.
Okay.
I did catch a bit of the prep interview, and at the very beginning, you said the reason that motivated you to write this in the first place was actually political in nature, or rather, like other people's politics, the actions that drives people's actions, uh, or the beliefs that drive their actions, whether that's how they vote or different things they do. And I deeply relate to that. So I wanted to ask this throughout this meeting, but the surrounding conversations were about probability and belief itself. And I'm not really interested in deconverting. By the way, congratulations, Bill. I'm, either side of the fence that you're on. I'm, happy to be in the same room with you and have
Hey,
these conversations.
Ken says I was never really an atheist. I wasn't a real atheist.
No true atheist.
So it's lukewarm atheist.
Lukewarm.
And we need more committed atheists, faithful atheists.
What I'm more interested, rather than deconverting, I'm not really interested in deconverting anyone, but I would like to be better at deconstructing arguments, if that makes sense. With certain family members or friends that I come across, sometimes I briefly wrote this in the chat through this meeting. People will say, "Hey, I believe this is divine intervention, or this is a sign from God, or this is," and it doesn't even have to be the Christian God, because I have various circles of religious friends. And this informs their politics, this informs their decisions. I believe this is prophecy, and this is why I'm taking this job. So sorry if this is long-winded, but have you had any better luck after writing this book, or any advice on how to help deconstruct certain epistemics or different, I don't want to say worldviews, that feels too comprehensive.
Yeah, right. Well, what you're asking for is sort of the tools and equipment that come with sort of a course on critical thinking, which would focus on kinds of arguments, common sorts of fallacies, what justification is, how you acquire it. So there are a number of books books by philosophers that cover these topics. I have a book I co-authored with my colleague Steve Nadler called "When Bad Thinking Happens to Good People." You might look at that for some of this information. But yeah, I'd encourage you to just sort of go to a philosophy section at your local bookstore or e-commerce bookstore and type in something like critical thinking, and you'll find a variety of books that teach you certain analytical skills that might be of use to you.
I'd add to that, Joel, that what we've learned in the bookstore and the book club rather is experientially, we already knew theoretically, is that a lot more is accomplished through relationship rather than having the best argument. It's about people, and you have to have that relationship to even be able to ask the question, have the right to ask the question. So, and that's sometimes hardest with family. Well, these are my relatives. That makes it harder to me. It makes it harder sometimes. Let me go ahead and announce next week, and then give a special thanks to Larry for being our guest. So next month, rather, we're going to be having a very different book club next in July. Justin Brierley will be back, and he was, I think, the first year we had Justin Brierley from Unbelievable from the UK. He's a freelance writer, speaker, broadcaster. He's worked in radio, podcasts, videos. Until April of 23, he was the theology and apologetics editor for Premier Christian Radio and hosted the Unbelievable radio show and podcast. He's written the book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God in 2023. His first book is one we did 5 or 6 years ago, which was Unbelievable. Why, after 10 years of talking with atheists, I'm still a Christian. And so we did that book with him, and he's just written the update to that. And that's the book we're going to do next month. It's titled Why I'm Still a Christian After 2 Decades of Conversations with Skeptics and Atheists, The Reason I Believe. So we will get some reasons for him. I still think stubbornness might be one of the reasons, but we'll cover that when we get there. But this is going to be different because of the time zone that he's in the UK and the schedule to make it work. We've never done this before. A Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., which is July 9th. And it's going to be, because of scheduling, a 1-hour book club only. So we have to really quickly get into the questions. And I will post up where you can get the book. And we will always try to have a video alternative for those who don't have time to finish the book as well. We'll try to post that as well. But I'm looking forward to talking with Justin Brierley again.
Now, James,
do you recall he's the reason I'm in this book club? I heard about this.
I do remember that. And so ironically, when we first had him on, he mentioned on his radio show that he was on this Texas-based, he got the name wrong. He said Christian and Atheist Club. But it was close enough that you were able to Google it and find it. And so you had to hear all the way from the UK in order to know that we were down the street from you. And you've been a faithful member ever since then. So
yes, Ken, it would not be the same without you. So we appreciate you being here.
Sure.
It's always nice to see you. James, now for the Wednesday, Justin only has an hour, but we can keep talking afterwards.
Yes.
Right.
We can keep the conversation going.
We can go for another hour if we wanted to, but yeah, Justin will be. But Larry, thank you so much. A pleasure to talk to you.
Any final word for the atheists and the Christians in the group? Do you have any advice or suggestion?
No, I think it's important to remain cordial and respectful of each other's positions, and I think what you're doing is great.
Enjoyed the book and enjoyed the interview as well, and felt like we were able to really connect with you and get to know you better. And so thank you for being part of the family.
Sure.
And thank you, Kelly, for coming on and subbing. Are you coming back next month?
Only if I can use just a avatar, because I don't think my face is going to be presentable yet.
An avatar would be understandable.
That'd be just fine. You could use the famous Godless Granny image. Yeah.
Yes, we can use that. And thank you for that. And it's good to see you again too, Kelly.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, Larry.
Bye.
Good night.